Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Budget Subcommittee on Education. Today we are here for community colleges. With about 2.3 million students, the California Community Colleges is the largest higher education system in the entire country and critical to our state's educational, economic well-being. We will first review several proposals from the governor so that once we receive the final Proposition 98 revenue figures in May, we will have a more informed basis upon which to make our final decisions. I think overall the governor, the legislature, and the chancellor's office appear to all be in general agreement that access and student success are the key issues for community colleges. Today we're going to try to focus on several issues identified in the agenda, the first of which is enrollment growth. We are interested in hearing whether the 3% enrollment growth figure proposed in the governor's budget is the appropriate growth level for next year, or what the alternatives would be. We will also be reviewing proposals that the governor has put forth to help students achieve their educational goals. A new idea this year is to put significant funding into the student equity plans. Hopefully today in the hearing we will receive some information so that we'll have a better understanding exactly of what the governor is proposing with these plans, how the chancellor's office is thinking about this money being spent, and how we would determine whether the funding and the spending for the student equity plans were successful. Additionally, the governor is proposing to flex up to 25% of several categoricals that serve high-need student populations. This appears to be a major policy shift, especially since these are well-established programs that support, again, some of our highest-needed student populations. We need to determine whether this is an appropriate approach in boosting student success. Colonel Chavez, do you have any opening remarks?
Yeah, just a question. What's with the little name tag on everybody's jacket, the little white one? What does that say?
It's success, access, and equity.
Thank you. That was it.
There we go. Thank you. All right. Mr. DeBobine, any welcoming comments? All right. So while we wait for some of our colleagues on the subcommittee to join us, I would like to skip the voting items on the agenda and jump right into our first issue for our subcommittee agenda, which is enrollment growth. And so I would like to invite representatives of the Department of Finance, the Legislative Analyst's Office, and the Chancellor's Office to join us.
Very good.
Thank you.
Chair, members,
yes.
Mario Rodriguez, Department of Finance. Historically, apportionment growth has been allocated on a formula based on annual changes in demographics, such as high school graduation rates or adult population age spans. During the recession, the formula was suspended due to lack of funding for apportionment growth. Since last year, apportionment growth provided in the budget has been allocated equitably across all colleges, regardless of the actual need of the community's college service area. As of the most recent reports, the amount of full-time equivalent students served by the colleges is still 136,000, or 11% below their 2008-9 high. The governor's budget proposes to increase enrollments by about 34,000, or 3% statewide, with resources targeted at areas of the state with greater need. While we understand that every area of the state needs an increase in enrollments of 3%, we also know that some areas of the state need much more than 3% to meet their community's demand. This is precisely why we are proposing the Board of Governors approve a revised growth formula that gives consideration to the demographics of the college's service area when allocating the growth resources provided in the budget. We understand that there are concerns regarding the timing and implementation of the revised formula, but we believe that since the Chancellor's Office is already well down the road of developing the formula, it can be accomplished before the end of the current year.
All right. Anything else from Finance? No, not at this time. I'd like to move on then to the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul Steenhausen with the Analyst's Office. The Sergeant has distributed a handout. I wanted to point out a few pages you might find helpful for reference purposes and context for the testimony you're going to hear this afternoon. Page 1 of the handout, it's a 2014-15 budget, community colleges. Page 1 of the handout notes that last year community colleges served 2.3 million students, which is actually down from about 2.9 million before the recession and the budget cuts. You can see there in the middle of the page that community colleges serve a diverse group of students, many of whom might be called at risk. Nearly 50% of community colleges are financially needy, receive fee waivers, and about 90% of incoming students arrive unprepared for college-level work in math, English, or both subject areas. So for the most part, community college students need extra help, financial, academic, or other forms of assistance. Page 2, just point out the total funding increase as proposed by the governor would be $489 million in Proposition 98 support. Page 3 is just for reference for you. It summarizes the governor's funding proposal for community colleges. You'll see there are a number of technical adjustments. The bottom of that figure has the proposed augmentations, which you're hearing today. Page 4, just wanted to point you point that page to you. Last year, as you know, the legislature voted to consolidate dozens of K-12 categorical programs into a new local control funding formula. And page 4 shows you that community colleges still rely on a number of categorical programs. I think the number's up to 25 or so. If you skip to page, Finance provided an overview of their enrollment growth formula proposal. Page 8 provides our office's assessment and recommendations of those proposals for enrollment growth. As Finance indicated, the governor proposes $155 million for 3% growth. Now, community colleges went years during the recession where they weren't able to serve everybody seeking a community college education. With the improved economy, there's been an opposite problem in many districts, and that's districts are reporting trouble meeting their enrollment targets, getting enough students to enroll. For that reason, the Community College Board of Governors has requested only 2% enrollment growth for 2014-15. Now, in May, the legislature is going to receive updated information on enrollment trends in the current year, the current fiscal year, and that's going to contain detail on districts that are meeting or exceeding or falling short of their enrollment targets. And we recommend the legislature use that information to make a determination on the appropriate level of enrollment growth funding for the community colleges. In a related issue, there's a proposal for enrollment growth allocation formula. Now, enrollment growth formula has not been an issue that's needed to be addressed for years because during the recession there were budget cuts. The state now finds itself in a position where it has money to add enrollment slots, and we agree with the governor that community colleges need an updated enrollment growth formula. The current regulations on enrollment growth have expired, and those old formulas didn't necessarily capture enrollment demand. The proposal for community colleges to have something in place by July 1st, though, we think is just too fast. This is particularly true given that the Adult Education Consortium program is currently underdeveloped and it's scheduled to become operational in 2015-16. So the legislature will want to make sure that the enrollment growth formula for community colleges and the enrollment growth formula for the Adult Ed Consortia members are aligned. And so we recommend postponing implementation of a new enrollment growth allocation formula until 2015-16. And in the meantime, for community colleges to receive growth money as they are in the current year, which is on an across-the-board basis.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just remembered we are focusing on enrollment growth. So next we would like to welcome the Vice Chancellor, Mr. Troy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, I'm Dan Troy. I'm the Vice Chancellor of Fiscal Policy for the California Community College Chancellor's Office. Pleasure to be with you again this year as we hope to build a very balanced budget that leverages the Prop 30 dollars we have to provide, as you eloquently stated at the top of the hearing, success and access for our state, very important issues. As those are the main priorities for the Board of Governors and for our Chancellor, we're certainly extremely appreciative of the administration's proposal in January. There's certainly a great deal of success and access funded in this budget. In terms of the specific question on the agenda and on enrollment growth, I think it's, as we look at the information that we're receiving in the current year on enrollment growth and the current year budget provided about 1.6% growth for districts. As of our initial reporting of the year, it looks like districts are coming in very close to that number, or maybe slightly below. As we look at the data, though, I think a few things we need to keep in mind. And one of them is that after years of reductions, districts were very decidedly not in growth mode. They were not staffing up. They were turning away students. And over time, that message does get out to the community. Perhaps you tried to get a course at one point and couldn't find room, and maybe you gave up trying. And now that we have resources back in play, it will likely take a little bit of time for districts to get that message out to the community. Again, that we're open for business. Give us a try again to help meet your higher educational needs, and for colleges to appropriately staff up to support all the new course sections that are on the table to fund. In terms of whether 3% is exactly the right number or not, I think that is, as Mr. Steenhausen suggested, I think we could take a look at the data in May. We'll probably have a little better idea of what we think districts can handle at that point or not. We're certainly willing to reconsider the information when we get to that point. Though I do think, again, part of what we hope to do with budgets is provide a signal to districts as to what the state priorities are over time, and by providing some significant amount of access over time, regardless of whether the right number is 2, 2.5%, 3%, send that message to colleges that this is where we're going over the next few years, so they can staff up and do the community outreach needed to get students back into the fold where we want them. In terms of the governor's proposal on the growth formula, we think the governor has highlighted some very important issues there. We certainly do need to revise the growth formula, and we have a task force, or rather work group, I should say, working on those issues right now. We think the governor has highlighted some very important priorities for determining the growth formula. We're looking at issues such as adult population, with a particular emphasis on the 18 to 30 group in a given district area. We're looking at unemployment rates as a proxy for the need for career tech or job training. We're looking at some other issues as well, such as whether districts have been carrying large amounts of students over a cap, which indicates the demand in their community and the willingness of the district to meet that demand. We think that there's room to use that as a proxy for heightened enrollment demand. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at. But we would note that it does take time to finalize these issues. We have a regulatory process that requires public input and prior to our board approval and later finance approval of those regs. Districts simply need to know, they need some time to know what the rules of the game are. Growth is the key component of funding in our system. That is by far the largest item we fund in our budget. So when you change the rules of the game, districts need a little bit of time, I think, to understand what those rules are. If we pass a budget on June 30th and as of July 1 we have new rules of the game, I think it's fair to say not all districts will have had time to understand the implications of those changes. So we would support delaying implementation to 15-16.
All right. I'd like to, before I go any further, take roll call.
Mr. Murasaki.
Here.
Mr. Chavez. Here. Mr. Nababne. Here. Mr. Nastandi. Here.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to open it up to the committee for questions, and if I may, I'd like to start us off. First of all, this is not just limited to community colleges, but I'd like to ask Mr. Rodriguez, representing the Department of Finance, why is the governor proposing to fund enrollment growth for community colleges, but not for the University of California or the California State University?
Yeah, so it's the systems. Well, they're all higher ed. They're very different. Community colleges, 40, 50 years ago, were born out of the K-12 system, and they're local governments, but the state classifies them as local governments. So they have their own budgets they deal with. Whereas with UC and CSU, we budget them as a system. So we could never say to the chancellor's office, well, just keep them at the same level of funding, or give you guys additional resources, and you guys work out between the districts on how you're going to spend those resources. So it goes back to just more of a historical way that we funded the colleges.
Okay. And so why the 3% when the chancellor's office has indicated that they may not all of their districts. I understand that there are different districts that are in different situations. It seems to be the large urban districts that are saying we're ready for more than 3%, and but it seems like a good most of the other school community college districts are saying that they need a little more time to ramp up. Why the 3%?
Well, keep in mind that the 3% decision was made in November, right? November, December timeframe, and so that was before any of the information was coming out on this year. I think, as noted by Dan Troy, we're very interested in making an aggressive attempt at restoring growth that was lost during years, particularly in areas of the state that we know have high waiting lists and a lot of students that really want to get access in those, many times in those large urban areas. But being realistic, we are going to continue to look at what the data tells us. That P1 came out about a month ago. P2 will come out in about a month from now. We're going to kind of look at those numbers, see if 3% is still right. We're not wedded to this number. We're not going to hold on to it forever. But more than anything else, we're just interested in making sure that students and communities are able to be served by the local community college in the capacity that they demand. So,
all right. And what about the LAO's recommendation that I believe there was the LAO's recommendation that we look more at the enrollment growth funding for 2015-2016 rather than this upcoming school year?
So I think, as far as what year the actual formula is implemented, I think we feel so strongly because I think a year matters. This is going to be our third year coming up that we are allocating growth funds, and I think we would have preferably had seen the Chancellor's Office begin working on a formula earlier. But I think a year really does matter for certain areas of the state where students are on really long wait lists trying to get into courses. So I think that's where we're coming from, that a year to a student matters a lot, and so at the state we should be doing everything we can to get the resources allocated properly. So that's where we're at. All
right, and forgive me, but I want to go back to how the community colleges are linked to the UCs and the CSUs. If the governor is clearly making it a priority to increase the enrollment for community colleges and also to focus on the success rate of community college students transferring to the UCs and the CSUs, then wouldn't it be logical that if we're going to grow, if the governor is committed to growing the community colleges, he also needs to be able to accommodate all of those transferring community colleges by growing the UC and the CSU enrollment? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Molly Quasabarth, Department of Finance. And as far as UC and CSU goes, the administration typically doesn't propose a budget the last couple of years that provides specific allocations for, say, enrollment growth and all the categorical programs. So they get a pot of money, and so this year we're proposing a $145 million increase for both UC and CSU. If they choose to use some of that for, advanced or increased enrollments, they have the means to do that.
But
So, in terms of your question about if the community colleges are going to be producing a lot more transfer-ready, based on this additional apportionment growth, that's something we definitely consider in 1 or 2 years when it looks like all the community colleges are, producing all these students, they have nowhere to go. At that point, we would consider looking at transfer enrollments.
But if we agree that that a budget can be interpreted as a statement of the state's priorities, and the governor is demonstrating that by proposing a significant enrollment growth for community colleges, I guess I'm making more of a statement than a question. But it seems to me that the governor's budget should also reflect the priority of increasing the enrollment at the community college or at the Cal State University and University of California levels also. I will leave my editorial at this point and turn to Mr. Chavez and Mr. Jababini.
I'd like to, for the, I guess, the LAO, direct my questions to page 4 of your chart. And looking at the programs and budget comparing 2013-14 to 2014-15, the proposed, it's going to increase to $489 million. I noticed that the increase is in the areas of physical plant and structural support and student success and support programs. Is that where the increase in budget's going?
That's correct. That's the main increase in the categorical programs. There is money in apportionments as well for enrollment growth, but that's correct.
How much is it in the apportionments?
Apportionments would increase by $232.5 million. That's at the very top of that.
Okay. So a total of 232 plus 489 million. So it's 710 million, something like that.
232 plus the categorical increase, which is 268. It's in the parentheses.
Okay, so it's a total of 489 million then?
And actually, if it helps, page 3 has a breakout on detail on how the number is, the 489 is reached.
So my point is this. It seems to me that from a macro standpoint, looking at a 3% growth across all the community colleges may be something up here we can manage, but recognizing that different community colleges, because of their plant structure and needs of the community, may have different measurements. Is the 2% strictly from a managerial point at the macro level, or was it actually going to the field, asking what they could actually grow to, and you developed a number? I guess 2% is 46,000 students, so you went ahead and said, we can increase 46,000 students. Did you go out to the field and develop that number, or was it determined from a managerial point up here?
Yeah, Mr. Chavez, I think I can help answer that question. Yeah, the 2% figure or 3%, whatever number you see in the budget, is simply a statewide number. And I think, as Mr. Rodriguez has indicated, it's a diverse state. And I think we'd expect that some areas are not going to be growing at all, and some areas are going to be growing very strongly. And so, given just looking at the P1, for example, which is our kind of early year report of how the allocations are going, we have, I believe, LA, of the 1.6% we have statewide, I believe LA's share was up to about close to 2.7%. So they're an area with high demand and high growth. So we're able to reallocate some of the funding to them from the areas that are not growing strongly. So you're right that the 2%, 3% number, whatever is funded in proposed in the budget, is a statewide number, and it's not going to be reflective of what every district actually receives. We will reallocate it based on regional need.
But being more specific, I understand it came from your P1 numbers. The 2%, was it determined at the state level from a managerial standpoint, just looking at the P1, or did you go out to the field and ask them, what was your capability to grow?
We did both. Certainly our budget request document we submitted to Finance in the fall, which requested 2% growth, is a consensus document developed with stakeholders. So everyone who participates in the group has various interests that they like to see represented in our system request. So we're definitely divvying up the pot a little bit between areas such as increased access, support for categorical programs, COLA. We did look at data to determine the 2% number. There were some groups that wanted to request more than that, but in discussion with some of our with some of our executives at the districts across the state, we tempered that number down to 2% because they were suggesting that many areas of the state were not growing. So yes, we did do a survey of districts to try to figure out the right
I can
number.
go talk to my school, my community college in my district and say, you're getting your growth numbers were met. You put your numbers in, was added, and the states, they're happy with those numbers then. Is that right?
Yeah, and again, you'll find different responses from different districts, but we did do a survey of chief instructional officers throughout the state to ask them whether or not they thought they could meet a 2% growth. And again, you got mixed results. Some districts said no, and some said we could do higher. We thought 2% was an appropriate middle ground at that time.
So then if we agree then that we're going to, if we were to go with your agreement, not to go to the governor's recommendation of 3%, but go to 2%, then I guess you'd be able to take that increase in funding and cut it by a third?
Well, I think if we choose not to fund at a lower level than the governor's proposed 3%, I think we would recommend redirecting those resources to other high priority needs of the system, including support services, professional development, career technical education, areas like that.
So you want the money, but you don't want to increase any more students coming through?
Well, we're happy to meet the demands of the state, but we're also wary of leaving resources on the table when there are other priority needs. If there's not 3%, if there's not demand, for example, for 3% statewide growth, then some of that money is just going to sit in our budget unallocated, and that's not what we want to see happen given the other priority needs of the system. I want to be absolutely clear. We do need the resources very much so. We had absolute reductions in the down years of over 12%, and if you add in the fact of the foregone COLAs and the loss of purchasing power with that, that's an additional roughly 17% we lost at the time. So there's no shortage of needs for our system.
So you want all the money, but you want to increase it only to 46,000 students, not to the full 70,000 students that the governor wants.
We're happy to provide access to the extent is there, but we do need to remember that these districts do need time to staff up, to do outreach to the communities, to get the word out there that they're open for business in terms of course sections again, and some of that does take a little time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeBobny.
So I have actually a couple of questions. I'll start with kind of a broad question to the administration and I guess to both of you. When we were talking about either whether it's 3% or 2% for enrollment figures, the services and I think the revenue the money that's being used to generate this will be to benefit to existing students, to help them graduate, to help them be able to transfer sooner. Is that both assumed on both sides here?
Yes.
Okay. I think in my school district, I have an urban school district. It's in the San Fernando Valley. They could easily meet the 3% target. They probably could do 4 or 5%. So I think we have a disparity here between school districts. And as you pointed out earlier, which I think was a very good point, that when you're funding the UCs and you're funding the Cal States, we're talking about a system-wide approach with individual campuses making decisions. When you talk about the community college system, obviously we have a much bigger system, but also much more diverse needs, it seems like. I've seen firsthand what these cuts have done to my local community colleges, and I know we could easily, from what they've told me, but what I've also seen and talked to students, surpass 3%. You're going with a 2% number that obviously fits a lot of other school districts, and some might be less than that. How can we kind of reconcile these two needs? Obviously, there's always going to be winners and losers, and obviously in a system this diverse, there's going to be a lot of differing needs, but I'm trying to reconcile how we can look at this from a state perspective, but also keep in mind that I have a community college district that could easily do 3%. Does the administration have any thoughts on whether a tiered system in the future would be more applicable. Does LAO have any opinion on this to see how we can, target this without having one blanket approach? Because it seems like 3% isn't appropriate statewide, but there clearly are urban districts where that 3% might be even low. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
So for the administration's perspective, that's exactly why we proposed a new formula. And because we recognized very earlier on that, just throwing out a 2% or 2.5% or 3% number was really not going to get it done. As you discussed, there's varying needs across the state, and what we'd rather have, instead of saying everybody gets 2 or 3%, and then you might get more than that if other districts don't grow, we'd rather have is a very thoughtful approach to saying, look, you're getting 4%, you're getting 1%, so that way they can plan and kind of figure out, as early as possible, what should we be expecting from our students and from our courses, and what can our community expect. So,
yeah, and I would just add that again, if whatever percent is funded statewide does not necessarily reflect the percent that every district will achieve, and we will reallocate those growth funds to the districts that can earn it. So if you can pick any number, for example, if you want to go with the governor's 3%. I certainly do not expect that every district is going to earn exactly 3%. Some will earn 1, some will earn 0, and then that gives us the opportunity to reallocate some of those savings, if you will, to the districts that can grow in excess of 3%, and that's exactly how we proceed. So we do have a process that takes into account regional differences.
Okay, so that's one follow-up. So when you were talking about going to a 2% and having the additional revenue used for, say, support services, how would you differentiate between something that would go towards enrollment? And maybe give a couple examples of what funding for enrollment would include and what funding for maybe support services would include that would kind of be a difference between the two.
Sure. We certainly want to fund seats and access for the students who need it, but we also want to ensure that we're funding qualitative programs. It's part of our goal is not just to have you could presumably have we could maybe double the seats in the state, but at a very low level of quality, and students wouldn't succeed or be ready to transfer to UC or get their certificate degree. We need to ensure that we're able to support the students on a qualitative basis. So counseling services, assessment, support for needy students, tutoring, things like that. We need to make sure that those support services are there as well for students so they can succeed, not just have a seat.
That's a very good explanation. And I would advocate strongly for more funding for disabled students, but also especially more funding for full-time faculty and more ability to have faculty that has office hours. I know we've had a number of student town halls, and the number one issue that comes up with me when they're talking about the frustrations they face as students is not being able to have enough of a relationship with their faculty, and not having enough full-time faculty, not having faculty that's able to have office hours. I think when it comes to student success, we need to really take a look at the ability for students to have that relationship with their faculty again. And thank you for your information.
Correct. And any budget is a balance between success and access, for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Nastandi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the LAO reports, they have a proposal to more or less block grant 7 of the categoricals into one. Do you favor that?
In terms of block granting the proposals, we're not supportive of that at this time. Looking at the categorical programs was something that the Student Success Task Force a couple of years ago did spend a lot of time thinking about, and one of the ideas that was mentioned at the time was a block grant proposal. Certainly, many of these programs do provide needed assistance to specific populations, such as DSPS and EOPS, and there was a lot of reluctance among the group to go there in terms of block granting those proposals. One thing this task force did do, and I think some of the governor's proposals are trying to get at that issue, is ensuring that while we do have some dollars that support specific populations and their needs, we don't want to silo the services overly. We want to make sure that those programs are coordinated in terms of the response to students. You don't need to get an EOPS answer or a DSP answer to a question a student may have. We want to get a comprehensive answer to them that leads to student success. So I think from our standpoint, we're not supportive of the block grant proposal, but in terms of breaking down silos between the proposals and ensure that all the resources provided to districts are coordinated and can help students achieve success. We're definitely supportive of that.
Mr. Nastandi, we actually haven't gone to issue 2, the student success proposals, which, I mean, I don't want to be guilty of siloing the issues here, but
that allows us to jump to issue 3, I think.
You know, it may help to wait for the presentation first. So thank you. Any other questions regarding enrollment growth? Mr. Ting, yes.
My apologies for coming a little bit late. I know that the proposal is to hold this over through the May revise, but as we look into May and finish our budget deliberations, I would like to get some more background as to how you got the 3%. I know Mr. Dababne mentioned he thought that his colleges could hit the 3%. I don't know that that's true system-wide or where the justification is, and would just like to see that background.